to make myself clear. Just leave me alone. Leave me alone.
John Knight has made one woman's life a misery, following her, writing to her, threatening her and ringing her. Russell Hoskins even steals from the woman he's obsessed with. Tonight, the Cook Report turns the tables on Britain's stalkers.
He just said very calmly, well, it's about time to die.
Actually, it's what I call, and many have called, mental terrorism.
And then all of a sudden you've got, like, fatal attraction on your doorstep.
He's in my nightmares.
Hello, Jane. I saw you at Santa Monica College, and I followed you. God, you are just the type of woman I've always been looking for. I'm watching you.
Los Angeles, and the voice of a stalker still at large in the city where stalking was first recognized by the police and where there's now a special threat management unit.
Stalking in California as a crime, a specific crime, is now what we call an alternate felony misdemeanor. That means we can prosecute first-time offense for stalking as a felony, which is significant.
I'll kill you for sure. I'll kill you for sure. That's more than a threat. It's a promise. You don't like it? Have me arrested.
America is unique in having precise laws to protect its women from those who would stalk them by phone or in person. Such laws can prevent the serious assaults and murders now occurring in Britain.
Just as I was leaving the house, the telephone rang, and a man was saying to me that I only had a few minutes to pick my daughter up in, and if I wasn't faster than him in getting to the station, that he would put a knife into her back. That was the very first telephone call that I had.
What started off as a casual introduction at the village hall became a nightmare. I was bombarded with thousands of phone calls, hundreds of letters, cards, flowers, all sorts of things. I was spied on, I was followed, and it is still going on.
I had about 10 women complaining about this whole question. And then, of course, it culminated in the fact that a woman in my constituency was murdered in this set of circumstances. So this quite clearly indicates that there are all sorts of women in our country being tyrannized by stalkers.
James Cran's constituent, Penelope Bell, was murdered by Raymond Fisher, a neighbour who'd stalked her for several years. She was shot dead in front of her family in the garden of the village pub. Fisher then killed himself.
He just said very calmly, well, it's about time to die. Whether Pen thought, well, I don't know what she thought, but she didn't move. It was as though she said, well, you know, I've had enough, do your worst sort of thing. And he then shot her.
He shot her a second time, but she fell. He actually shot her twice.
From that range with a shotgun, she didn't stand there a chance. It makes a big hole.
Fisher was watching me and really thought I was going to die. It was facing the pub, and I saw the gun come up towards his face and he shot himself.
A stalker stalked. You're watching John Knight, a man who's also keen on guns but obsessed with one woman. Despite being prosecuted for harassing her and being bound over to leave her alone, he's still following her every move.
The night the police officer came here and told me about the guns, and he did in fact say to me, I don't want to frighten you, Vicky, but we have to make you aware of how dangerous this man could be, because he's totally obsessed with you.
So obsessed, in fact, he's changed his name by deed poll to embrace Vicky's. John Caldwell Knight plagued her with thousands of phone calls, 300 in one day alone. In hundreds of letters, Knight lists a string of dubious qualifications, outlines his engagement plans, and how he'll kill himself if ever she married anyone else.
Gradually, the phone calls got more and more and more, so that there were hundreds of phone calls, in fact thousands altogether.
Hello?
I was getting calls all through the day, all through the night. I mean, the phone just didn't stop ringing the whole day and night. And in fact, I used to put the telephone in my bed because I was logging the calls for the police, and they just rang. The phone just rang constantly.
Stalking, or erotomanic stalking, should be seen as a continuum of men's pursuit of women who they feel have abandoned them or rejected them or deceived them in some way. And it's very much linked in with sexual jealousy or pathological jealousy, feelings that the man has of need to possess the woman and have the woman.
Elaine McMullen was inundated with frightening telephone calls. The police asked her to keep answering them so they could trace her stalker.
I then had to befriend him, hoping that he would want to meet me. As the calls went on, I felt that I knew this man, but it was like talking to a lover. And by this time, the telephone calls had become more tender, although every call that I had was obscene. Everyone contained something sexual.
A wealthy middle-aged man stalked artist Charlotte Sell for months, taking hundreds of secret photographs of her. She wasn't even aware of his attentions until detectives arrested him.
He had high-tech surveillance equipment and camera equipment and lengths of rope in his van when they arrested him. I think the police had known about that before. He got blinds to pull over the windows of his van so that he could watch without being seen.
Obsessive letter writing is also a trademark of most stalkers. These are far more than nuisance letters. They often reveal dangerous sexual fantasies that intimidate their victims.
I opened the letter and I read the first line, and it said, "Dear Michelle, I'm just writing to tell you how horny and sexy I think you are. And my boyfriend works away." And I thought, oh, he doesn't normally write letters like this. He's normally quite civil. I thought he must have been on the booze or something. So, and I don't know why, I didn't read the contents of the letter. I just went to the bottom of the letter and it said, "I just want you to know that one day I will find you when you're on your own, and then I'm going to get you." And I knew, I didn't read anything else of the letter, my heart just went vroom. And 3 days later I got another letter saying, "I'll rape you on your BMW."
It serves you well to keep your ugly face in New York, Marty, because you come to Los Angeles, I'll kill you for sure.
Maybe I am an animal, so far as women like you are concerned.
Now I can say I've seen you with no clothes on, and you were beautiful. I love you, kitten. Will you marry me?
They know exactly the power of their words. They know their victims well. They know how to keep their victim in a chronic state of fear and anxiety.
The nature of the stalking crime, the big damage is done mentally to a person's psyche. It actually is what I call, and many have called, mental terrorism.
The fear, the smell that can come from your body when you're so afraid is appalling. And it is appalling. Nobody, no human being should ever be allowed to do this. I'm a businesswoman and I'm firm and I'm solid, and for anybody to be out of control of their lives or their children's lives, that is unbearable. I wake up every morning and I feel, how on earth am I going to get through the day? Is he going to be following me? Is he going to be outside my business? How do I keep my daughter safe?
John Knight is still stalking Vicky Caldwell, and we're still following him. As well as accosting her in the street, he's written lengthy essays observing her life in frightening detail and spelling out his fantasies of a relationship with her that has never existed.
Well, I have been told that if he did something to me physically, then they could arrest him. But otherwise, they can't do anything else. I think these people are dangerous. Even if they don't do anything physically, the mental torture is pretty awful. And I'm a widow, I've lived on my own, and I've had to cope with it all on my own. Well, I have seen him in terrible tempers, so I think he's capable of physical violence.
Richard Badcock works at a secure hospital, developing psychological profiles for the police.
We do know from studies of rapists and people who've gone on to commit violent offences that stalking is often quite an important part of the preliminary preparation for such an attack.
American Curtis Howard was jailed last month for murdering British student Catherine Ailing. He'd followed her to England from Massachusetts, where she'd been on an exchange visit. For more than a year, Howard stalked Catherine and her sisters, a year during which the police were unable to stop him.
They said, you know, until he does something, there's nothing we can really do. Of course, when he actually did something, she didn't even know it was too late. She wasn't even warned. He just came out from behind and stabbed her to death. I mean, he didn't phone her up and said, I'm here. She didn't know anything about it. For the last 11 months of her life, she didn't know she was being stalked. She didn't know that he'd hired a private detective to try and find out where she was living. She actually moved in the meantime, but he had her car number, knew she was still around at the college. Found her car, parked beside it, slashed the tyres so she couldn't get away, blacked out the windows of his own so she couldn't see in. And I suppose as she was bending over to get and put her stuff in her own car, he came up behind her. And she was only 5'4", and he was 6'4", and a man. I mean, there was no way.
Howard had previously been excluded from Britain precisely because of his stalking activities, not however by the police, but by the immigration authorities. But he used a false identity and passport to slip back in and continue his relentless pursuit of Catherine and the sisters he believed were hiding her.
And the man had broken into the house with my husband in the back garden. He'd gone upstairs, he'd slashed our bed, he'd carved a backwards swastika on one of the bedroom doors, and Catherine is dead on another. He'd left a big white envelope with black letters with Catherine Ailing on it, which we didn't touch. We just immediately called the police. And I was hysterical by this time because this was like something out of a film. I mean, here you are, just a normal little person from a small provincial town in Sussex, and then all of a sudden you've got like fatal attraction on your doorstep.
Elaine McMullen continued as a police decoy. On one particular evening, her stalker made dozens of calls and was almost caught red-handed.
I could hear the detective saying to him, who are you ringing? What are you doing? Why are you using the telephone box? And the answer from this man was that he was just ringing his wife to pick up a takeaway. Of course, it was totally untrue because I could hear it on the other end of the phone. And the policeman didn't think that they had the right man, so let him go.
Taxi driver Russell Hoskins was traced by the police just hours later and arrested. As full details emerged, Elaine was in for a shock. This is one of a score or more of telephone boxes from which Russell Hoskins terrorized Elaine McMullen with threats against her daughter's life and an unending stream of obscene phone calls. From here, the stalker could clearly see his victim's house on the other side of the valley.
When they eventually caught him, I realised he knew every bit about me. He knew the insides of my home. To my horror, he lives directly behind me. He was prosecuted, bound over to keep the peace for 3 years, and fined £800. He will not stop. I know he won't stop.
They seldom do. John Knight, convicted of 6 offences of making improper calls to Vicky Caldwell, is once more stalking her. We filmed him over 3 weeks, and on every occasion that she went shopping, he accosted her. Knight is bound over by the courts not to have any contact at all with Vicky, and yet still he stalks her.
Why do you keep pestering me? Why do you keep sending me letters? I don't want your letters. I don't want to have a cup of coffee. I just want to be left alone. I made myself clear. Just leave me alone. Leave me alone. Just leave me alone.
I hate him. I hate him. I really do, because he has spoilt my life.
Do you think he will stop?
No, I don't. No, I don't, because I just think it's the mental torture that he enjoys.
Elaine has two loves in her life, her teenage daughter and the fan-tailed dove she breeds. Since her stalker was prosecuted for making malicious calls, including the one that threatened her daughter's life, many of the doves have been poisoned and some are now being stolen.
I hired detectives last year to keep us safe. I've done every possible thing that I can do to hide away from this man, and nothing has worked. And all we want to do is just continue our lives.
Under the wing here, as you see, got a nice bit of bear flesh.
To end Elaine's misery and to trap the thief, we turn to bird expert Chris Neal. He marked the remaining doves in two distinctive ways. If any of them are stolen, then they'll be easy to trace. The Los Angeles unit is the world's most successful at tracing stalkers. The Cook report flew two sex crime investigators in from Britain to discover what could be learned.
We've never defined the problem. I mean, that was the useful thing about coming here, to see their definition of stalkers, because I think I was under a misapprehension that, working as I do in serial rape and murder, there are people that I might have thought of as stalkers that I think I now would redefine as prowlers. I mean, stalking is personal. You have a particular person in mind, and it's overt, and you're trying to intimidate someone.
Their whole approach is very much geared towards the victim in providing care, not just when an incident is being investigated, but in ensuring that there is absolute continuity and that there's continual contact with the victim until, hopefully, the incident is concluded. And of course, that can go on for some time.
In the United Kingdom, I'm hearing more and more that there is more of a problem going on, and I think it needs to be addressed. And setting up units such as ours, they don't have to be exactly like ours, but maybe utilize some of the techniques that we use, and even some of our organization, to help combat this problem.
In America, convicted stalkers face immediate imprisonment and up to 10 years in jail. Britain's new criminal justice bill proposes a maximum prison term of only 6 months.
It's an extremely serious form of harassment, and it's a serious crime. And I would like to see the police and the courts empowered to put much, much more serious sentences on people who are convicted of these crimes.
But only today, the appeal court set Christopher Gelder free. Though he had made repeated obscene phone calls, the court held he had not occasioned grievous bodily harm by making such calls.
Christopher Gelder started his 18-month jail sentence in May, and he's appealing because he thinks that injustice has been done. I started my sentence 2 years ago. Where's the justice in that?
Will your fear ever abate, Christine?
No. No, it'll never go away.
Can you tell us why not?
Because he's there all the time. He's there. Sorry. He's in my nightmares. He's just there all the time.
My name's Roger Cook, Central Television. I must raise the question. I'm not harassing you. You've been harassing Mrs. Caldwell for 4 years.
Not at all, sir.
Mr. Knight, you have.
Not at all.
She has been stalked by you
Not by me, sir.
for 4 years.
Not at all, sir.
You've been to court as a result of this, haven't you?
No, sir.
You've been to court to be restrained, and what's more, when your house was searched, weapons were removed, including shotgun ammunition.
No, sir, that's not true.
You terrified this woman for years.
Oh, that's a load of rubbish, sir.
It is not. It is an absolute fact. There was a letter from you this very morning.
Not written by me, then, sir.
It certainly was.
The last time I wrote to Mrs. Caldwell was more than a week ago, sir.
A letter arrived this morning.
Well, I can't speak for that.
From you.
May I see it?
That's a letter from you.
It's certainly my envelope.
Confronted with the evidence, the normally talkative Mr. Knight was suddenly stuck for words. Unfortunately, his letters to Vicky haven't dried up. By this morning, she'd received another 6 from him. Elaine's doves continued to disappear. At the same time, Russell Hoskins, convicted of making those malicious calls to her, advertised doves for sale. We secretly bought 6 of them and returned them to the Cook Report's bird expert.
Right, here's one of the doves, and here we've got the mark under the wing we made. There we are. The stump there, there's the stump, and the feather fits perfect.
Absolutely perfect match. Conclusive proof that Hoskins was stealing Elaine's doves and is again putting her under unbearable pressure. The fear of ultimate violence is the main concern of all stalkers' victims. That and finding some explanation for their behaviour.
Elaine, your caller first made contact by making threats against your daughter. And he did that in order to focus your attention onto him. He then followed that up by a series of obscene phone calls. So he's resorting to these perverted means in order to get a sense of satisfaction for himself. And he can only do that at your expense. Vicky, I've had a chance to read some of Mr. Knight's writing, and it seems to me that the most striking thing is the sense of omnipotence. He's trying to generate a sense of all-powerfulness in order to rewrite the rules of reality to fit what he wants.
Mr. Hoskins, Roger Cook from Central Television. Are those stolen doves as well?
No, right?
Because you stole some doves from Mrs. McMullen.
No.
The woman whose life you've made a misery. You have convictions for making obscene phone calls to her. You threatened her daughter's life. You keep on making silent phone calls. You've even resorted to stealing her doves. You have. We've got the doves that were marked, and you sold them to us. What do you got to say to that? Why are you still making this woman's life a misery? And is somebody like you fit to be a taxi driver, out on your own at night, with unprotected ladies as customers?
I don't think that I was his first victim, and I don't believe that I'll be his last. But at the end of the day, this has got to, somewhere along the line, be a prisonable offence. Otherwise, women and men living in fear, this terrible fear, something must be done.
I want to know why you're stalking this innocent woman.
Nobody is doing anything to her.
The last thing we have from this man is stolen doves.
We've not
Her own doves stolen. Marked. Marked by us. And you sold them. I marked the black mark under the wings, and you sold them.
No, I'm sorry, Father.
You did?
No, I'm asking to leave, right? I wasn't going to leave the dog off.
Are you?
Yeah.
No, look, we have not stolen those doves. We bought them from somebody.
They were her own doves, marked. We had them marked by a professional bird keeper.
You don't... Can you...
What?
You've made this woman's life a misery, and you're still continuing to do so. Right down to stealing doves. That's pretty pathetic, isn't it? Our evidence on Hoskins and Knight is now on its way to the police.